So Tim Ryan gave a grandstanding speech the other day on the House floor, basically blasting Republicans for their lack of support for the American worker and labor unions and things of that matter. Take a look at the video and then we'll talk about it.
Mr. Speaker, one of the earlier speakers said, "This is the most dramatic change in labor law in 80 years." And I say, thank God. In the late 70s, a CEO made 35 times the worker. Today, it's 300 to 400 times the worker. And our friends on the other side running around with their hair on fire. Heaven forbid we pass something that's going to help the damn workers in the United States of America. Heaven forbid we tilt the balance that has been going in the wrong direction for 50 years. We talk about pensions, you complain. We talk about the minimum wage increase, you complain. We talk about giving them the right to organize, you complain. But if we were passing a tax cut here, you'd be all getting in line to vote yes for it. Now stop talking about Dr. Seuss and start working with us on behalf of the American workers. I yield back the balance of my time.
Okay, that was pretty funny. It was. Especially the part where like he was basically like flailing or whatever. And it's like, heaven forbid. That was, I actually kind of laughed at that. But it's especially funny because of who Tim Ryan actually is. And if you don't know, I'll give you a little bit of insight. Now, what he said exactly was correct. And we're going to get into that in a second. But let's just kind of harken back and remember who Tim Ryan actually is. So if you're like, watching this video and you're kind of new to politics and you don't really, know a lot of the ins and outs, then you'll think like, oh my God, this guy, he's a progressive warrior. Oh wow, he's an ally. He loves the American worker, and maybe he does, but just watching this video alone and not having any prior knowledge will kind of give you a distorted view of who he is. Tim Ryan ran a presidential campaign, basically on a right-wing platform, and he was very hostile to the likes of Bernie Sanders, the most prominent leader on the left, okay? Tim Ryan is also the same person who is, when you watch that video, you think he's for the American worker. He could be. And he opposes Medicare for all. He said if Medicare for all came across his desk, if he was the president, theoretically, he would veto it. The exact same thing that Joe Biden said, ironically. That would help American workers tremendously, okay? But that aside, what he said was indeed correct. So basically, the House passed a bill called the PRO Act. It's the Protect the Right to Organize Act, okay? And essentially what it is it is a bunch of worker strengthening policies, okay? A bunch of policies that would uplift the American worker and, be more pro-union and pro-organizing and pro-labor and things of that nature. There's a lot of different ins and outs of the bill that I think are good. Of course, more provisions could be added and the American worker could use a lot more help than they're currently getting. But I do think that this is a great step in the right direction, and it's insanely needed because, after the Great Depression, during the 1930s, pretty much during FDR's reign as president of the United States, labor unions in this country was fairly strong, much stronger than they are now. Of course, after that administration was over, they basically got attacked. I mean, there was an assault on labor unions and they got decimated. And now we're at a point where America as a country is generally anti-union. There's right to work laws across plenty of states, and it's not a good situation for workers, especially with the situation going on in Bessemer, Alabama, which is actually like right next to where I live. Ironically, I stay in McCalla, Alabama. If you're not familiar with the workers that work at Amazon in Bessemer, Alabama, fighting for a right to unionize, I suggest you look into that. I'll probably make a video on it in the future, maybe. But it's a very interesting situation, and with that going on, and with millions of other workers in this country, fighting for better wages, fighting to unionize and things of that nature, this is a very good bill. Now, what I would question about Tim Ryan is he, just gave his grandstanding speech, very loud, very boisterous, very bodacious about, him being pro-worker and about the Republicans, quote unquote, being anti-worker. You know, the Democrats in the Senate, or 8 Democrats in the Senate, blocked a bill that was for the minimum wage. Okay, remember they voted against it. Kirsten Sinema with his thumbs down. It's a really big deal. Why isn't some of this anger, I would question, not directed at his fellow Democrats? Why? Why won't he and some of the other more progressive members in the House band together and form a block, since they're pro-worker, right? Form a block and then block any, because it's a narrow lead. They have a narrow lead in the House. They lost seats, remember? Form a block and say, you know what, until we get the $15 minimum wage or any kind of really progressive, substantial, life-changing legislation for the workers, for the people of this country, we're going to block everything that you guys send through. Why doesn't he get with the Justice Democrats and do something like that? Why doesn't he call on his fellow Democrats in the Senate that voted down the $15 minimum wage? Since he's pro-worker, that would help the workers a higher wage. They want higher wages, right? I just feel like him, going at the Republicans in this way is kind of beating a dead horse. Of course, what he was saying is true, and we're going to get into that. But I just feel like it's kind of beating a dead horse. Like, all the Republicans in Washington, period, are too far gone. I mean, it's just, I don't know what to say. I mean, you can't help those guys. They have gone off the deep end. They've gone so far right, it's ridiculous. But what he said there was correct, and it was funny. He said that if it was a tax cut, they'd be lining up, which is insanely true. They've never seen a tax cut that they didn't like. Well, except if it's for like the middle class and workers. No tax cuts for you. Tax cuts for the rich, of course, but none for the workers, of course. He said, stop talking about Dr. Seuss, which is funny because that's all that they have when it comes to the Republicans. Their policies are so unpopular. And let's just go over their policies very quickly. Deregulation, more guns, tax cuts, not for you, but for the rich, endless war, and freedom, but not really. Okay. And patriotism. That's really all they have. And they can't win on those policies. Those policies are incredibly unpopular. You know what I mean? So they have to get into the culture where they have to talk about Dr. Seuss. They have to talk about Mr. Potato Head. They have to talk about Antifa and all that, because that's what riles up their base. And a lot of the American public, to be quite honest with you, they fall for the culture war drivel, which is why the Democrats really need to hammer home the economic issues, because that's where they win. But as we've seen time and time again, they fail in that area. Okay. But this was Tim Ryan giving a grandstanding speech on the House floor. I thought it was pretty funny. What he said was indeed correct, but coming from Tim Ryan, I'm just a little bit skeptical.